Welcome to the Stop and Think podcast. I'm your host, Will Dole. Thank you for listening. If you enjoy, you can rate and review on Apple Podcasts or YouTube or here on Substack, wherever you listen. I guess you don't review on Substack, but you can leave a comment. The post I'm reading today is part of the communion meditation series that we're doing in our church through the Apostles' Creed. And this week, we're at the fact that Jesus suffered under Pontius Pilate. We believe that Jesus suffered under Pontius Pilate. Now, if you're familiar with the gospel narratives, this part of our confession in the creed isn't exactly a news flash. Pilate plays an important role. He was, of course, the one who had legal authority to have Jesus executed, so we read in John 19 and verse 10. But when we're looking at the creed, speaking as it does of the very core matters of our faith, we're talking about the one creed that basically all Christians, Protestant, Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, all can agree to. It touches on the very core matters of our faith. What is Pontius Pilate doing in here? Doesn't he feel a little out of place? Well, this reference to Pilate, random though it may seem to us, is very important. It locates the suffering and crucifixion of Jesus at a real point in time. It emphasizes the historical fact of Jesus' work on our behalf. Now, liberal theologians, the 19th and 20th century, they wanted to extract the unimportant, quote unquote, historical claims from the Bible in order to leave us with the kernel of spiritual truth. Now, you can see an impulse that's similar to that in the work of a secular scholar today, someone like Jordan Peterson. He thinks there's all kinds of truth in Christianity, but he isn't quite willing to submit to the truth of Christianity. But the creed doesn't give us this easy way out. Similar to the argument of the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 15, where he appeals to more than 500 eyewitnesses of the resurrection, the creed reminds us that the crucifixion is a real crucifixion, which took place under a real Roman procurator and led ultimately to a real resurrection from the dead. Friends, if this work of Christ in our place did not actually happen in space and time, then our faith is in vain. Our hope is in vain. Everything we do on a Sunday morning as believers is meaningless and silly. But it did happen. Jesus did suffer under Pontius Pilate. Pilate was not ultimately the one responsible. His authority was given to him by those higher up. Higher up in Rome, sure, but ultimately by God the Father in heaven. That's the point Jesus makes in John 19 as Pilate asserts his power, his authority. Jesus says, you would have no authority if it were not given you from above. As Jesus says in John chapter 10, verse 18, no one takes my life from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. Jesus suffered under Pilate, ultimately not because Pilate was a weak and evil ruler, though he was that. Jesus suffered under Pilate because this is why he had come into the world, to seek and to save by his suffering that which was lost. Jesus laid down his life at Calvary for you and for me. And because of this, all those who trust in his sacrifice in their place are promised participation in his resurrection life. We are bound to him, and in that binding, we are also bound to one another. And this is what we celebrate in communion, that Jesus really did lay down his life for sinners, and that he really has made us one by the blood of his cross. It's a historical fact, and you can bank your eternity on it. This has been the Stopping to Think podcast. I'm your host, Will Dole. Thank you for listening. If you want other sermon-oriented content, you can also go over and check out the Remsen Bible Fellowship sermon Substack/podcast, and we don't keep the sermons up to date on there, but we are releasing weekly sermons from our church, either that I've preached or that guest preachers have given. Most of our old series are on there, and they are usually a few weeks behind where we're actually at in real life. If you want to hear things as they're coming out, you got to come to church. But those are there for you for your edification as well. That's the Remsen Bible Fellowship podcast. And once again, Stop to Think podcast. I'm your host, Will Dole. Thank you for listening.